Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in Geography. We are going to continue talking about Eastern Europe today, and as part of that conversation, we're going to dive a little bit into Ukraine and then talk about Belarus and Moldova today. So let's look at what we're going to be able to do. Here are our learning targets of the day. I can identify and describe the physical geography, the economy, and the culture of Ukraine. We're also going to look at identifying the economic and the cultural traits of Belarus and Moldova today. So let's start by just kind of giving ourselves a little bit of a quick history lesson. So in Pripyat, which was an amusement park that was going to, in the same city, the Pripyat, Ukraine, was an up-and-coming amusement park in the late 1980s. And it was set to be opened on May 1st of 1986. But those plans were interrupted by a pretty catastrophic event that occurred on April 26, 1986. I want to give you a moment. Think about it. Can you think of that world event that might have left this abandoned for quite some time? If you guessed the Chernobyl events, you are correct. So those of you who don't know about what happened at Chernobyl on April 26, 1986, essentially the nuclear reactor exploded. There's a meltdown. And so this is an area that continues to be abandoned today for fear of radiation. So certainly quite a catastrophic event, and highly encourage you, if that sounds interesting to you, to dive a little bit deeper. All right, let's begin with Ukraine today. So for those of you who are my American listeners or my United States listeners or my students, just to give you a little bit of context, we're talking about a nation that is slightly smaller than the state of Texas. And with that makes it the largest nation that is entirely within Europe. Certainly Russia, both being a Eurasian nation in Europe and Asia, it would certainly hold that title of being the largest. But we're talking about those that are entirely within the borders of the continent of Europe. So where does it rank worldwide? It's 46th largest in the world when it comes to total land area. As far as kind of the physical geography, the Carpathian Mountains are right along the southwest border. And if we look further to the east, closer to, say, a nation like Russia, for example, you're going to start to see the geographical feature that we call a steppe. And so this is kind of those gently rolling hills and partially wooded plains. The Dnieper River are among the many river systems in Ukraine. It's very important to the economics of Ukraine even today. And one of these areas in Ukraine that has proved to be important and consequential throughout history, not only for Ukraine, but for the world in some cases, would be the Crimean Peninsula. So going back a little bit towards our World War II days, the Crimean Peninsula served as a meeting place and the site of the Yalta Conference, which brought together people like FDR, later Harry Truman, as well as Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin. So you've got the Soviet Union, you have Great Britain, and you've got the United States represented. And a large part of this was the planning after World War II, what was going to happen as far as some of the world powers kind of trying to help rebuild Europe. More recently, in 2014, Russia annexed this nation and made it essentially a part of Russia. So certainly some big changes occurring in the Ukraine, and certainly in more modern history as well. Certainly a part of the trials that, the impeachment trials that occurred with President Trump in 2020. All right, looking at that physical geography, so if we're looking here at a map, we can see the Dnieper River, including Kiev, which is the capital city of Ukraine. Really important there. You've got the Dnieper uplands and lowlands, and certainly you've got the Black Sea as well as the Sea of Azov. Okay, and you can see here certainly the Carpathian Mountains to the southwest. When we're talking about the economics of Ukraine, when it comes to fuel sources, this is where Ukraine heavily depends on other nations. And if you guessed Russia, you're correct. About 3/4 of its annual oil as well as natural gas requirements and 100% of its nuclear fuel needs do come from other nations. And in particular, that dependence is on Russia. However, when it comes to agriculture, which is a very important part of the Ukrainian economy, Ukraine is the breadbasket, and they're known as the breadbasket of Europe. And that rich soil covers about 2/3 of the land that is in Ukraine, which provides a really important economic opportunity for the Ukrainian people. When we talk about those people, the Ukrainians, their early ancestors, the early Slavic groups, certainly utilized the rivers for trade. They utilized it for agriculture, and they built a large part of their cultures on that. Fast forward to the 1930s, so prior to World War II, Joseph Stalin placed these farms under the control of the government, and Ukraine certainly felt the influence of the Soviet Union before other nations in Eastern Europe did too. In 1991, they became a free nation after the decline and fall of the Soviet Union. Mostly you will hear Ukrainian, but certainly you might also hear Russian in the Ukraine as well. About 75% of the population is Ukrainian and about 20% is Russian. So kind of similar to the idea when we were talking about that Russian influence in Finland. It's even more largely felt in the Ukraine. And again, the geography, especially the relative location, plays a really important there. Also, check out, if you haven't already, the Hopak dance. You'll also see a little bit of Russian influence there too, but a very unique aspect of Ukrainian culture. All right, shifting gears to Belarus and Moldova. Belarus, for, again, my American listeners, it's about a little bit smaller than the size of Kansas as far as states go. Agriculturally, you're going to see potatoes, you're going to see grains, sugar beets, fruits. Again, pretty similar to what we've seen so far in Eastern Europe. Potash also, about 95% of it is used for fertilizer. Again, an important export for Belarus, although certainly that has declined. They've seen about a 50% drop in that use, and that could be due to new sources of fertilizer. A lot of those exports make their way to Asia and Africa. However, when we're talking about the United States, for example, its potash particularly comes from Saskatchewan, and Saskatchewan we know is one of the provinces of Canada. As far as the Belarusian people go, there's about 9.9 million as far as the population goes, and about 2/3 of it is urban. So even though agriculture is important, you're going to see that a majority of people do find work outside of agriculture. They are predominantly Eastern Orthodox, and Minsk is the capital of Belarus. When it comes to Moldova, this is an area that has rich, fertile soil, and certainly that helps to promote agriculture. Again, some very familiar things as far as agricultural products. You're going to see sugar beets, potatoes, apples, grapes, tobacco as well. They also have quite a large exporting economy in which they export machinery, metals, construction materials, as well as textiles. Population's smaller than that of Belarus. You've got about 4.3, half of which are in the cities, which means rural is certainly an important way of life, much more than we see than the population of Belarus. And Chisinau is the capital of Moldova. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for this edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in Geography. For my students and, of course, for all my listeners, I really encourage you to check out the check-in quiz. Use it as kind of a way just to make sure that you're picking up on those big ideas. For my students, use the notes in class. Ask any questions that you have. Those of you who are not in my class and are just listening, really thank you for listening. It's much appreciated that I in any way can help promote some geographical literacy out in the world. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for us today. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you later.